Welcome to the Wild Ag Podcast, where we'll serve as a connection point for landowners and conservation professionals who want to integrate conservation and agriculture. I'm Dr. Andrew Little, Professor of Landscape Ecology and Habitat Management and Extension Specialist at the University of Nebraska.
And I'm Nate Pfluger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes. Welcome back to the Wild Ag Podcast, everyone. I'm Nate Pfluger, joined by my co-host, Dr. Andy Little. And today we have Merlyn Nielsen here with us. And he has a number of things that we're going to touch on today, but one of the main reasons he is on is because he is a landowner, and he can speak to a lot of the problems that landowners have to deal with when they're trying to implement conservation on their landscape or on their property anyways. So I've actually known Merlyn quite a while, and he's probably known me longer. I actually came up through the Seward Pheasants Forever chapter and went through their youth mentor hunts. And learned a lot from those guys. It's a great group of guys. And now in my position as Precision Ag Coordinator, I've actually got to go out and work with Merlyn on his property and also help out with some chapter stuff here and there. So this is definitely a special episode for me. So
absolutely,
Merlyn, please introduce yourself, give us some background, and we'll go from there.
My name is Merlyn Nielsen, and I live in rural Seward area. Have lived there since 1997. The farm that we live on there is one that we purchased in 1991, and then we finally decided that it would be more fun to live in Seward than to live in Lincoln. I'm a retired UNL professor. I'm an animal geneticist, so I was a professor in animal science here on the Lincoln campus for about 41 years before I retired 10 years ago, come July 1.
Oh, wow.
And as Nate said, we've had habitat projects on our farms ever since 1998 was my first planting. Did that when that's about a 33 acre planting on a hill at my Seward home farm property. And I did that one with a drill that we got from Lower South Platte,
cool.
NRD. That was where I could find a drill, and went out and planted that in spring of 1998. I spent that first summer on the ground staring at, wondering if anything was going to come up. So I went through all those fun things like other people. We did use mechanical shredding. That was my background as a farmer, I guess, or farm kid. We used mechanical shredding on that to make sure we didn't have a weed overgrowth that first year. Second year, we started seeing a few things show up, and the third year it was fantastic. And that's back in the days where the only thing other than about 5 warm season grasses was red clover in the type of CRP contracts we had at that time. Since that time, we added a few more acres to that 160. We had another 32 acres with a purchase immediately on our west side, and it had an 8.8 acre CRP contract, also as a filter strip contract with Upper Big Blue NRD. And that we've stayed in. It was probably planted about 2001 or 2. We bought the property in 2003. So that has been in continuously since 2003. And we just love the results that we see from that from the standpoint of conservation, the beauty of grasses. And even though it did not require it, I just bought extra wildflowers and put them in there anyway because I like flowers as well as grasses. That original one that I started talking about, again, was originally mostly grasses. The little bit of red clover got choked out in about 3 or 4 years. And then when some of the renewals came for renewing contracts, we did go in and do different practices to lessen the impact of the warm season grasses so that flowers and legumes could get a start back in that. And we had kind of a fun little project the first year that we were doing that. I didn't want to lose all that tall grass and pheasant population. I am an avid hunter and have bird dogs. So we actually cut hay off of half and then disked it really hard. And then the next spring, we went in and seeded the flowers and legumes into that. The other half, we burned it the same spring we were seeding the half, we were burning the other. And then as it grew back, we did a half kill with Roundup to knock it back and then seeded in the fall in the very same flowers and legumes into that. I can tell you we got them, and some of this is timing of the year, some of this is weather, some of this is moisture, but we got way more flowers and legumes to come up in the part that we hayed and disked really hard than we did where we used chemical treatment to knock it back. But we still got plenty of flowers in that way as well. We have filter strips and that came along as part of an EQIP program that we did on a farm that we have in Butler County. And we would have done that work in about 2004, 2005. That continues it has good wildlife habitat there. And then we have another small farm, an 80 in Saline County, that we started by putting a quail buffer program around the outside of fields. It was only about 16 acres at that time. And then when I had the new SAFE program came along in about 2006 or 7, we went and filled in the rest of that 80 acres with the middle of that with a safe contract. So that has different types of plantings as well as has shrub plantings in it. And we've maintained that to this day. When the quail buffer came out after several years, unfortunately, because I had gotten rid of all the cropping in the middle, turned it into a safe project, I had to convert to a CP 42, I think is the pollinator contract. So we were able to keep it in CRP and just had to kill everything and start over again with grasses and flowers in that. So that's an 80 acres that is totally devoted to wildlife and habitat in Saline County, and it's down pretty far south in Saline County.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool to hear, and it's great to hear from somebody, from a landowner, from your perspectives and kind of why you went into this. And I think that's one of the things that we really, when we started the podcast, we really had that idea of we want to be able to bridge ag and conservation and finding ways. We know there's no cookie cutter approach. Every field's different, as you know, but finding those opportunities where you can ensure really the sustainability of that. Because as a landowner, I think, just that's one of the things you're really cherishing is the sustainability of that system long term for grandkids and on down the future generations. And so how do we do that? But doing it in a way, obviously, from a profitability side, too, from a producer, who would be listening to this, who obviously may have a corn bean operation or cattle or whatever. They're trying to think about, how do I try to optimize this where I'm able to make the most amount of money I can while ensuring that I can keep that sustainable long term. And I think that's what most producers are, questioning all the time. Like, how do I do that? How do I kind of keep it that cutting edge? So it's great to actually have you on today because I'm excited to talk through some of these things. So I appreciate it.
Well, Andy, you bring up a very important part of that, and that is I do have a son and been very, very lucky throughout my life that he likes to do the same things that I like to do. He's a much better golfer than I am. We play a lot of golf, and it's hard to get him to play with me anymore because I don't hit it very well. My stiffness in old age, but he's got his own pointing dog, and it's easy to get him to go out and do maintenance projects to keep our CRP programs going. Sure. Whether it's a check, see if we have any invasion of any noxious weeds, and we're pretty lucky we don't have much of that with these long-term fields that we have.
Absolutely.
But if we're getting ready to do a burn or if we're doing some other type of maintenance project, why my son Brian is right there doing a lot of that. And I'll get my plug in, can I? Here,
Yep, absolutely.
Brian has his own business now of cedar tree removal. He has a ASV 135 skid steer, which is a 132 horsepower skid steer. It's a big unit.
That's a big,
It has very wide tracks on it, so he's very stable on all kinds of ground. And he's got a specially made Fecon circular mulcher that runs on the front of that, and he can eat trees. And he likes doing that, and it's his way to make money now. And when you look at all the pastures and even some CRP contracts that need to be cleaned up once in a while, we can get a hold of Brian and give you a bid on whether he can get that done for you in a reasonable amount of time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So obviously family is a huge part of why you're interested in conservation, as Andy mentioned and you mentioned. You hunt with your boy and do all sorts of conservation practices with him. Let's rewind a little bit. What got you into conservation? Maybe the good old days? You want to talk about those?
Full disclosure, I am 76. And fortunately, always been in good enough health that I can go out and walk the hills with dogs. Been pheasant hunting since I was 13 or 14 years old in Sarpy County at that time. That's where I grew up. Believe it or not, there were pheasants in Sarpy County at that time. And, there weren't any deer around there at that time, but there were pheasants at that time. And I've just stayed with that all the time. Even pheasant hunted when I was in graduate school over in Iowa, and had some good experiences in Iowa pheasant hunting back in the early 1970s. But then after we got established as a faculty member here in Lincoln in 1974, why all of those years I was hunting different properties, mainly in the southeast part of the state. Part of my research activity at that time was with a cattle project, and it was located on a UNL farm that was down in eastern Gage County, south of the town of Virginia. And so I was driving back and forth between Lincoln to Virginia to collect data and keep that research project with cattle going. Well, that gave me a lot of time to review what I would see along the way and make some stops and introduce myself. And I found that I could get my foothold in a place why I could get in there to come back with my dog and be a responsible hunter. You know, we only hunt where we have permission. We only hunt in ways that are as ethical as possible. We try to pick up our spent shells if we can see them and find them. So we leave nothing behind. We don't, put our lunch trash or our drink trash out on the ground. We clean everything up, and so we can get invited back. And of course, if you make a good impression on one place, pretty soon you can use that as a way to get on the next neighbor and the next neighbor as well. So did a lot of hunting in, again, between Lincoln and eastern Gage County for several years. And for some reason, as soon as we went west and lived west, we started hunting in that direction a lot more just because it was closer. And over time, as we gradually acquired a few more pieces of property and had some other friends that we could hunt, why we quit going southeast. We hunted mostly in the Seward, Butler, Saline areas.
That's awesome.
And folks listening to this today, or the younger generation, they probably don't believe you that you were able to hunt in Sarpy County. So how has that landscape changed, or what were those major changes?
Actually, one of the very best hunting spots that we had for pheasants was a grassed area that my mother's family, my uncles, owned, that is now totally covered by Google, Facebook, and all that development in Sarpy County. It doesn't even look the same now because they've just totally transformed that.
Urban sprawl.
Yeah, very, very much. But it's always been surprising that the deer population did increase there, as it has so many places across the Midwest. Deer love to eat what farmers grow. And of course, the trick there is to minimize depredation damage that can come. Keep the populations in check by proper population control
Yep.
that Game and Parks works at very hard at.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know that's obviously a big challenge for a lot of producers, growing crops and then having deer, for example, coming in there. And that's one of the things I always, talk to producers about is finding ways that they can, balance that out, as you mentioned, from a
Yeah.
population management standpoint. And I know later today we're actually going to be having taping another episode, but on the Open Fields and Waters program, and
Oh.
that's another opportunity where producers can, partner with, for example, with Game and Parks and other entities to be able to take and balance out populations by letting other folks come on there to hunt in their properties. And I loved your point about, that the treating the land, really is your own. Those properties that you're basically that maybe not your own, that you're going out and you're hunting on, you got permission to hunt on. I think it's so important. It's easy to take, and I've seen properties where folks, just obviously don't take care of them that are given permission to hunt there. And I think it's so important because you really look at it. This should be kind of like treating it like your own property. You wouldn't leave trash and other things out there, and so then you can get invited back. And like you said, it's great. Then it can really spin into other things like, oh, hey, and I hunt in this property, and the neighbor down here, they'll get you access. And so anyway, that's awesome. That's great to hear, and especially the landscape change over time. That's one of the things we talk a lot about in our lab, the Awesome Lab, is basically addressing how that landscape has dramatically changed and how that impacts, like you said, game bird populations, predator populations, all those things collectively. The landscape today is dramatically different than even just 15 years ago or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Things have dramatically changed. And so therefore our research has to keep up with that, and management has to keep up with those changes in the landscape. So yeah, I like that.
So you mentioned urban sprawl was an issue, at least for one of the properties that you hunted historically. What did the cropping rotation look like when you were younger? Was it still corn and soybeans? Was there some small grains within the rotation? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, when I was a kid, we didn't know what soybeans were. We thought that was something that came from China, which it did.
Yeah,
But
true.
I think we had a neighbor across the road that was about the first ones to have soybeans in our neighborhood in Sarpy County back in the late 50s, early 60s. When I was growing up as a kid, corn, wheat, oats, alfalfa, because we had cattle, so and we were feeding cattle, so we used alfalfa and corn as our main ration components. See a little milo once in a while, and of course, my wife grew up in Fillmore County. She's from Exeter, is her hometown, Fillmore County, and her father mainly was a wheat and milo producer during those years, and a little bit of alfalfa. Corn would have come in a little later, especially as irrigation was developed through that area. Remember, I'm old enough where everybody had an irrigation well, and now it's just it's so much corn and soybeans, and of course a lot of those places it's corn for 3 years and then soybean for one now.
Yeah.
Even it's not just a rotation like it is in the dry land and hill country.
Yep.
Well, and that's why I wanted you to touch on that, because biologists, we go out and we work with a lot of row crop producers or landowners, and they're like, where did all the birds go? The landscape hasn't changed. Well, maybe the topography in your area hasn't changed, but the crop rotation has definitely changed.
Yeah.
When you have wheat and oats within your cropping rotation, I mean, that's nesting habitat for game birds.
Yep.
When you go to corn and soybeans, you're not raising game birds on those acres. So I'm happy you brought that crop rotation.
And I think so, based on USDA NASS statistics, so National Ag Statistics, I think it was about 1965 in Nebraska would have been the peak when we had the greatest crop diversity on our fields, approximately around that time. And then obviously, if you look at that relationship relative to corn or soybeans, then that's kind of an inverse relationship to today, where that, you see obviously a dramatic increase, to your point, of corn and soybean operations going on. And obviously it's market driven. Things are driving that, where producers put more corn and soybeans in. But back to your point on the landscape change, that's one of the things I always, and I get that a lot of, like, really nothing's changed. I think the way I always kind of like to picture it is, for example, you mentioned cedar trees, your son earlier, like, cedar trees are growing every year. Those plants, that plant community is changing. You may not necessarily see that visually as a human walking out there all the time, But then as you start saying, oh, well, hey, that hedgerow's gone, or when you start looking at more dramatic things like, oh, hey, you mentioned like, for example, Google or another company like Walmart comes in and they show up with the bulldozers, and then you start seeing big change. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, things have really changed. But I think it's a lot of those little incremental changes that we don't necessarily see all the time. And then we just assume that, well, that just kind of looks the same. It really hasn't changed a whole lot. Well, that hedgerow that used to have pheasants in is gone, and then you have these other little small CRP patches you mentioned about earlier that are no longer there, that have now been tilled under and are put into production. And so a lot of that stuff, I think, is such a small change over time for a lot of folks, and including myself, that you just don't really think a whole lot about it and say, well, yeah, nothing's really changed. It kind of looks the same. But in reality, things always are changing. Plant succession that's just a fact of life. Succession is going to occur over time until that disturbance comes in. So.
Yeah, very good points, Andy. And as I look toward where we're going to be as we go further into the future, we're going to have to find ways to have larger plots of, the 10 acres here, and then you go 2 miles and you have another 10 acres. That worked as a way to of grasses, the CRP, and so on. That worked to build wildlife populations when we had other things in between.
Correct.
As soon as we level everything and it's all cropped hard, the 10 acres here and 10 acres 2 miles away just doesn't hold much anymore. So under those new types of situations, we're going to have the 100+ acre developments, and maybe not always with the same ownership. You might have an 80 on one side and an 80 on another side. There are two different owners in order to get enough area so that we don't have predators overrunning things to limit what we might be able to see in especially bird populations.
Yep. It's all about landscape connectivity, thinking about those patches. I always say about that, especially I use pheasants as a good illustration of that. If you have your patches like 50 miles apart, you can't expect the birds are going to get from one patch. And like that's just not realistic biologically for those birds. So thinking about connectivity of that landscape, and that's the hard part, is everybody has their own perspectives of how they need to do things and optimize production. Every landowner has their own landowner objectives. And so figuring out those ways you can kind of have like a landscape scale, design. But again, it's not easy because there's just a lot of variability in there. And that's the challenge, to your point. And I think that's spot on. I think realistically, that little 10-acre patch here, 10-acre patch here, long term, it's going to be really hard to sustain populations because you're losing that connectivity, constantly over time. And we've seen that. So yeah, that's a great point. I appreciate bringing that up.
I have many friends who farm very hard and heavy as well. But yes, when I hear comments in the coffee shop about, well, I just didn't see any birds this fall when I was harvesting, I said, well, where do you think they're going to hide?
Yeah.
When you don't have any fence rows, when you don't have any shrub pockets here and there, when you even mow your roadsides so that I mow with a 6 or 7 foot sycamore. I go around my road edges with that, just so you have good coverage or good ability to see around corners and so on. And it just kind of cleans off the side of the road. But after that, I want the other 25 feet to be nothing other than shrubs and grasses and weeds that produce cover, as well as some feed. Small seeds there too.
So when you're talking to your friends and explaining what they should do better, how often do you get them to see your side?
How many times do you get funny looks?
Very seldom. Again, the reason I kind of caution in that is my job is to tell people what to do, is to describe why things happen.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's all you can do is say, well, does it really? And I think of just the cost of more diesel fuel that you burn up and the equipment that you wreck and hurt over time because you want to mow everything. No, you don't have to mow everything. You want to live in town, live in town. If you want to live in the country, live in the country. And I just think we've over pristine some areas when we could let them be a little more country-ish, and we would have a little more wildlife.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's such a great perspective because you're not, as a landowner, you're able to have those conversations and talk about, this is kind of what we're doing. And I really honestly firmly believe I can provide a lot of the research that we do to individuals, but it really takes the individuals like yourself to be able to talk with your peers, your neighbors, ones you're going to church with or other functions with, and talk and just have those candid conversations about here's kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then that, I think, is eventually can breed success over time. Is it a ripple in a pond effect? No. I think it varies quite a bit. But the other thing I think a lot of times is you mentioned this earlier with prairie, kind of getting some of those perennial vegetation plants established. It takes a few years to get going. Conservation is the same way. It takes time. And we live in this instantaneous culture. I always like to say the microwave generation, because we just we want it now. I'm like probably one of the most impatient people out there. You just want the stuff to happen now. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen on that time scale. It usually takes time. And I've had landowners tell me before, like, hey, I've been talking with my neighbor for a period of time, and it took years, but then they finally said, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I think I want to start doing something. And like those types of experiences, it takes time. Like sometimes it just doesn't happen overnight. And that's the challenge. We all want that. But I think that's just a great illustration is those conversations you're able to have and share kind of what you guys are doing and why you're doing it. I think it's so important.
Right. And as Nate mentioned, that he came up through or had exposure early on with Seward County Pheasants Forever and other chapters, but because he lived in Seward County, why met up with us more. And I serve as our habitat chair, which means I make sure the drills are all working. I can share some ideas on habitat development, but I refer to or get our PF biologists involved very quickly because my expertise will be short very quickly, and I go to them for expertise on things I need for things we're doing. But we do generate money through our fundraising with our big banquet that we have in last Saturday night of February in Seward to invest in habitat development. It's not just keeping drills up that you can rent, and we do get a small fee for using those. It's not excessive at all. But we help habitat projects if people are establishing CRP or doing renewals of their CRP contracts. We try our best to help cost share the seed. So there with the CRP contract, there's a USDA payment cost share, and it's up front. You know that when you sign up your contract of what not only your annual acre payment will be, but what your establishment costs they can cost share with you. So we don't help with helping you pay for the tractor to put it in the ground. We help with the seed because seed's I think it's a big deterrent because wildflowers cost a lot of money, and they're a big part of our new plans that we put together. So we have been wherever we can come up with, and we haven't run out of funds yet. So that's the good news. Yeah, is if it's costing you $120 an acre to put seed in the ground for the seed only, not the drill or prep or the chemical prep or mowing or anything you might have done ahead of time, but the seed only. If it's $120 and you're getting $55 from USDA, we will make up the other, if I do my math right, $65 so that it costs you nothing for the seed. And we don't make you wait 6 months to get the money. You show us the documentation on what it costs and what you're getting from USDA, and we'll write you the check right away for that. We've also had some other projects where I think of two of them that come to mind very quickly, three of them. One was a 21-acre project that folks were willing to take out of crop production and put into habitat, but because of the timing, they could not get in on a CRP entry offering that came out. And the other one, I guess it didn't fit. Anyway, the other one was 18 acres, and another one was only about 8. But those projects, again, we went in and we bought all the seed.
Oh, wow.
And we are also making an annual payment. It's only $50 an acre, but it's not $150. but we're trying to get people in and stay with the program. And these are people who like wildlife.
Sure.
So we didn't have to convince them of that. And fortunately, they were not in the situation where they had to squeeze every ounce in order to buy food and pay rent on the table, buy food on the table. So they could stand the fact that they were making a little bit of sacrifice in the good interest of something good for society. And they like seeing some birds around
Sure,
once in a while,
absolutely.
and some other wildlife. And of course, those grasses and flowers are kind of pretty to look at anyway. And it's fun to go out and identify flowers, I find, and grasses.
Oh, absolutely.
So those are efforts to try and keep pulling more people in and sustaining that sustaining word again, Andy, that we've talked about. And so when people like Nate are developing new projects, why we'll be helping them. So the one that we talked about earlier in Eastern Seward County will cover the other part of their seed cost, not their seeding, but seed costs, so that the seed costs them nothing to get into that involved in that project.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
and that's the neat thing about Pheasants and Quail Forever chapters, that they raise the money at their banquets or other events, and then they get to keep the money, and then they decide where it goes.
Sure.
And the Seward chapter does a great job at helping the local community put habitat on the ground,
That's
whether
awesome.
they're paying for the seed or making the payment. And I want to back up a little bit, Merlyn. If I understand it correctly, were you one of the initial founding members of the Seward chapter, or how did that all start?
The Seward chapter is 25 years old. This was our 25th annual banquet that we just had this past February 22nd. I was not a founding member of that. I've been involved with the Seward chapter since I think about 2008. So I'll be about 17 years now that I've been involved. They let me in. And, we're always searching for new people. So hopefully somebody will listen to this podcast and will say, well, I'm in Seward County and I kind of like the idea of promoting wildlife habitat and youth development in enjoying the great outdoors. So maybe I better go to that website that's Seward County pheasantsforever.org and or .com. I forget. I know how to find it. So it's on my computer, so I find it very quickly. But we would love to involve more people. The more people we have, the more fun we have. Our youth mentor hunt that'll be in I think October. I should know the exact day. I should have brought that with me. Why we get kids out. It costs absolutely nothing to the child to take part, other than they have to have their hunter education done, and they have to devote that little more than a half a day. We'll feed you breakfast, we'll feed you lunch, and we will give you the shells to shoot, to develop your shooting skill a little bit safely, teach a lot of safety at the same time, as well as get out. We'll make sure you get a chance to see a couple roosters in flight and take a shot at those. Hopefully you'll hit those. Hopefully you take them home and provide nourishment to your family with those as well. And we've made sure that the experience is as safe as possible with regard to shotguns. We learned early on that if you did not control the guns, why little kids would show up with grandpa's 12 gauge that does not fit them. And not that you can always fit exactly, but we invested about 7 or 8 years ago now in 25 Browning BPS 20 gauge youth models.
Oh, cool.
They're absolutely beautiful. They are ambidextrous. You can be a left or a right-handed young girl or boy. We love all genders to come and participate. And therefore, we know we have a safe gun. We can teach the people how to use it safely and just have a good experience. Because if we're going to get our next generation out having fun, while we've got to do it safely, we also try to make sure people understand you only shoot if you have a safe shot. That's one of the things that I certainly beat into my poor son's head early on was just because you see something, you don't have to shoot. You don't have to shoot every deer you see unless it's a safe shot. And So safety is high importance, and the opportunity to just be outside, have that camaraderie with other men and women, boys and girls that are out with you. Enjoy the great outdoors, being outside, and treat everything respectfully and with good etiquette. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're doing exactly what Aldo Leopold, father of
Oh.
wildlife management, was doing, and that's really that building that lasting legacy. And I think that's so important, not only for your operation, but you mentioned with the kids, the youth mentor hunt. I think it's such a great opportunity to get kids outdoors, especially thinking about Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. They're the habitat organization, and you're getting those kids, oriented and understanding why. Do we need to do these things? Why do we need to ensure the sustainability of our natural resources? And not just an opportunity to go out there and harvest a few roosters while you have the opportunity, but really thinking about the sustainability of that system. And I think that's just a way that PF, I know, and QF has done that for a while. It's a great opportunity. So it's cool to hear more about the mentor hunt and stuff. So I appreciate that.
And Andy, one of the things, and I would comment on it earlier about finding places to go hunting. Yes, we can have public owned places. We got some beautiful ones in Nebraska. We can have publicly coordinated through open fields, open waters, and others, so that you can go on. You have permission to go on. Just have to stay within the boundaries as well. Those are well marked. Those open fields, open waters ones. But also, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try and establish a relationship with a landowner somewhere.
Sure.
And again, if you can demonstrate to them and use all your contacts possible. This is just good human relations
Sure.
type of thing. If you can find somebody that gets you started and you build that relationship with that person, you treat them right, they treat you right, then you find out that you can get on the next neighbor type of thing. And it may take a little work. It may mean that you're doing things in June or July instead of the day before season opens. And I'm being critical, I guess, here, but there are ways that you can build those relationships. And I've used the phrase, Nate and Andy, before, that I have forgotten more places that I used to hunt than I can remember right now.
Wow.
Now, I need to give a little more full disclosure. Besides, when I was making those trips, when I had hunted a lot southeast and stopped at places, and of course I hunted places right around the university research farm that we had neighbors that I would learn to get to know and talk to and get permission to go there too. But I also had, when you're a University of Nebraska professor in agriculture, a lot of students from around the state, and pretty soon when they know that they can trust you. So I had a lot of places I could go that way too. And again, I have more opportunities than I ever took advantage of.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think the Seward chapter in their youth mentor hunt is definitely top tier. Merlyn, Roy, Dave, Tim, Robin, Andy. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but somebody, and I'm sorry if I am, but they do a phenomenal job. And as I mentioned, I went through that when I was younger. And I vaguely remember you guys used to have a scenario where you would have to go up and ask a landowner on this youth mentor hunt.
That's cool.
To hunt their property. And those, as you mentioned, Merlyn, those are skills that I've carried with me, throughout life. It was a nerve-wracking experience when you're a young kid, but it paid off.
Sure.
Well, Nate, I remember who was the person who acted as the landowner sitting in a little pop-up blind that you would come up to have that experience. So it was the closest thing to being in my kitchen, I suppose, of being in a pop-up blind. And of course, you were trying to, on the other side, be, okay, I can't just say, oh, you came and asked, oh, go ahead and hunt, or open this gate, close this gate as you go through type thing. But you had to kind of start off by, well, who are you, and why do you want to be here? And which were true things. You can't just say, hi, can I go hunting your property? You have to say, my name is, maybe my mother or father or grandparents, and give some names. You're asking to be on their property. You got to be willing to divulge some things about yourself. And then, maybe tell a little bit about, ask them about, well, you ever been out before? You got a dog or not? Or your dog stay away from my cows or something like that, my chickens, whatever. No, those were kind of some fun things. And on my side, trying to act like the landlord, I had to be imaginative on those. So
I remember that very well.
It can be a little daunting, doing that. But like you said, I think this is the other thing that you mentioned about like June, July, like being also willing to help out, and hey, do you need an extra hand to do X, Y, or Z that has nothing to even do with hunting at all? Whatever, you need to move cows. The point is just being willing to help, I think, is another thing that's, can go a long ways for folks. So.
Well, I do have a couple other properties maybe we didn't talk about that are better for deer hunting, not so much for bird hunting, and friends, and that hunt on those. And so about every 2 years, we say, hey, we're going to have a tree removal day because I got some things growing up in a waterway or in a terrace that's grassed, part of a terrace. Can you come out Saturday morning at 10 o'clock and bring your gloves, and maybe I'll run the chainsaw or the whatever, but you can be my Tordon squirter.
Yeah.
Or you can haul off while I'm cutting off or something like
Yep.
that, or if I try and do something. So yes, very good point, Andy. Offering that, hey, you need help doing anything, heck, I'll come out and throw hay bales one day.
Sure.
As long as I know I can always come and sit in your deer stand throughout the season, or
Sure.
or have permission to be in your bird hunting area.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Well, and I think that leads us into the next point. Even though you implement conservation on your property, there's still a lot that happens after that with management, and having manpower to do that might be one of those barriers. Sure. So it's neat that you have friends and family that can come out and help. What other barriers have you found in implementing conservation across your properties?
Well, we can always talk about dollars. I guess I've always looked at it as I never had, and maybe I'm just lucky enough that financially I wasn't so hard pressed that I had to squeeze every dollar out of every acre that we own. So very, very blessed and fortunate in that area. But yeah, you want a kind of a reasonable payment, but it doesn't have to be the very top. And those have changed over time as farm costs have gone up, or the costs of real estate have gone up, and therefore rental prices on real estate have gone up. You have to match up with when there's new offerings that come out, whether you can get in or not.
Can you explain that a little more for folks?
To the extent that I'm smart enough to try and help you. Every once in a while, you'll hear an offering of continuous sign up or new signups, and you should always be in contact with your NRCS and FSA representatives so that they even know you're thinking about it. If you wait until you hear there's an announcement, you may not be as well prepared as you should be to coordinate that, to make it happen. So I think trying to always let your county offices, USDA offices, know that you would be interested if a new one came along, what that might be. Fortunately, there are Pheasants Forever has helped support with the types of CRP programs that might be coming up and coming out. I know the way I learned, we have one contract on our home place, which is our pasture area. It's in CRP grasslands. Because when I read through and I learned about at a PF sponsored and USDA sponsored session on new CRP projects coming out, and I read through and I said, okay, I have it cross fenced, so we rotate. I have water capability in each place. Trying to think of there's a variety of, you have to have at least 5 different grasses. I said, well, that's easy enough. It may not all be if I throw out a 3x3 hoop and look at it, I may not have 5 in there, but if I throw enough of them out, I'll get to 5. And you need to have 5 wildflowers. And then trying to think what else there was. Well, if you have if you use a tank, you have to have a ladder for birds if they fall in can get out. trying to think of some of the other things. And then, so to me, then it came down to, 150 days of grazing use, I believe. And then it was kind of like, well, as long as I don't put too many animals on it,
Sure.
that should be good. So at that time, it was in Seward County, but I had a person in NRCS from York who was working with that. He came over and I rode him around the property. He said, well, this is it. How many acres it would be, and is this going to qualify or not? And I told him the stock rates, and everything was a go. So we enrolled in that, and I have stayed with that one. But back to I think it's wise to be always visiting ahead as much as possible. And it's probably easier if you're on a corn soybean rotation to seed into soybean stubble first time than corn stubble first time, because you can go right in with our no-till drills and just plant into that. Actually, soybean stubble, we don't even use the coulters on the front of our larger no-till drill. But as compared to corn, you might be doing some tillage preparation, disking or something before you go into it.
And we up at NREC, which you obviously have experience up there from being a previous researcher here. So we actually have right outside of the headquarters, we have we put prairie strips. So we have CP43 prairie strips. They're in some of the fields there, and then we have that at a few of other research and extension centers. And the idea was just to be able to take and showcase that opportunity for producers. And back to your point with soybeans, that's what we did. We just drilled it right in just that following year after they had soybeans in there, and it was really easy to do that. And so then it's been, and the nice thing we also have is we have time-lapse cameras on those sites, because at the beginning of the conversation about how long it takes, we were talking about that. And that's what we wanted to show, is that in the first, couple of years, it may not look that great. And you're going, well, what's going on here? Why is it? And then it's like that prairie, because ultimately, it's going to emerge in about year 3, but it's taking and setting that root mass below ground. And that's the thing you don't see, because we're visual people. We're obviously looking at the above ground, but it's that below ground where it's growing that root mass, and then it'll eventually emerge out of there. So like at our site at NREC, this will be a third growing season coming up. And even just this past year, it was already looking really nice. So, yeah.
Are those immediately straight south of the headquarters building?
They are will be the east of the headquarters.
Over the east.
Yep, just to the east of the headquarters there. Yep.
Okay, so I guess I make the mistake of parking in the parking lot, going in for meetings, and turn around, come back out, get in my car and leave, or truck and car.
Yeah, and the reason we put them there, we work with the farm manager specifically thinking about, that was an area where they had a lot of erosion, and they were saying, well, how can we reduce that? Well, so we can put these strips strategically in here. And that's the whole thing, even back to the economic side of things, is how can we do this that's going to, we don't want to necessarily put it into the most productive acres. We want to maybe find areas that are maybe a little lower production. And we can use yield monitor data, for example, to do that. But finding ways that we can balance that out in a way it's very strategic in that field. And then I had a producer, we had a field day up there back in August. And he was standing there in the field, and we were talking about it. And one of the things that he was really excited was because you could put cattle on them as well. And so he said, I would like to put cattle on this. And I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was about 60 days or so that they could have cattle on it. And so coincidentally, we're actually going to be sharing out some photos where we actually had cattle on them this past winter up there, because they had asked about that, and they wanted to be able to take and put cattle out. So.
And your time-lapse camera just randomly caught a pheasant.
Oh, yes.
Within the prairie strip. Not a camera trap or a trail camera. It's just a time-lapse where it goes off every hour or something, and just happened to catch a pheasant.
Happened to get some pheasants, and that was one of the sites, because we have them right now. We have them at NREC, we have them at Clay Center, South Central Ag Lab, and then we have them out in kind of our West Central sites. And then we actually, and more recently, I think it was about a year and a half ago, we put it up at Haskell Ag Lab. So now we have them across 4 of them.
Oh, wow.
And the Panhandle is one we've been looking at. Unfortunately, it's been so dry out there. It's been really tough. And I got an email the other day that was talking about, well, should we plant? Should we not? It's been so dry, and, concerns and how that may impact it. But ultimately, that was just a great illustration. Like out there at the West Central one was, hey, look at that time-lapse camera. It's taking a photo every 30 minutes or so, and just happened to capture a pheasant. And actually had a few different pheasants were captured in it over the period of, a number of days. So
that's amazing, where it's not triggered by activity or.
So it was fun to see that.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of bring a couple points together is, Merlyn, you mentioned historically CRP was mainly grasses, right?
Yeah.
And then Andy touched base with the landowner who he said, hey, I like this particular practice because I can incidentally graze it with my
Correct.
livestock.
Yep.
And I think it's important to note that CRP has changed extensively over the years. Biologists working with landowners, figuring out what's needed, we try to submit or come up with different practices that are going to work for a
Sure.
wide variety of individuals, not just maybe the old CRP. So there's definitely a lot more practices out there now than what used to be offered.
Yeah, and I know, like, for example, CP43 of prairie strips, that extensive amount of research is going into that, particularly from Iowa State, who's really kind of been the leader in that work. But it's also one of the more flexible programs within the CRP program, kind of group of different programs, in the sense of, like, there's just additional flexibilities. Like, for example, one of the things that producers obviously always ask about is the flexibility of taking and turning my equipment around. Those turn rows, can I do that? Well, yeah, you can. You can't leave your equipment parked on there for an extended period of time, but you can definitely turn around in those. That's one of the nice things, and the producers were really excited about when we talked at our field day, because I also had representatives there from FSA, NRCS, of course, Pheasants Forever, and other organizations, because I wanted to be able to have, I'm not an expert as a researcher on all the program details, but they are, and they can answer a lot of those questions. And I want to continue to, build those collaborations to showcase those things, so that it's, there are other innovative ways that we can, implement programs on our properties. And it's not, like I said, one size fits all cookie cutter approach.
Well, you guys bring up a couple of other interesting points, and that's how you can use some of these plantings that fit very well with a regular cropping program. And the one about using them to have your end row, what used to be end rows that would erode in some hilly ground, if you could get the grasses established, and then you're only on them or come across them just when you're planting, maybe doing a spray. Try not to spray them out, and then your harvest time. Why that's so much better than just trying to plant in up and down the hill rows that just erode out the heck. So to me, that's an excellent conservation. With you're not you get a payment for it, so you give up that production, but it's not really good production on those end rows anyway. And the other one is with filler strips along streams. If you want to straighten out your fields a little bit, where you can have variable widths on those along the edge of the stream, you can get back to straight rows pretty well and not have all of the S curves everywhere. And so there's some things that fit very well with continuing to do cropping on most of it, but not all of it, but yet still have conservation practices that also fit with wildlife there.
That's good.
We have an item here we ought to get to.
Yes, and it's the reason that I really wanted you to come in. And a little background is we're talking about barriers to conservation and really perennial habitat establishment. Andy and I were at a workshop last month, and it was over mainly wetland conservation and things like that. But the conversation of land taxes came up, and you hear a bunch of folks they're not going to implement conservation on their property because they think their taxes on those acres are going to remain the same as highly productive crop ground. And obviously, I'm not a landowner, so I can't speak to that personally. But in conversations that I've had with you, it sounds like that's not really the case. If you get into a conservation program, there's a good chance that you're going to have reduced land taxes on those acres. Can you dive into that for me, please?
Right. Real good point, Nate. And yeah, I know we have visited about it before.
And really, the story on how this all came about would be good to hear too.
Yeah, we'll go back. Our two main counties, locations where we have CRP contracts are our home place in Seward County, and then this 80 acres we talked about in Saline County. And I got a notice one time from the Saline assessor that they wanted to know if we had any CRP acres because I think the state office of how we assess and evaluate land for taxing purposes, they felt that maybe that particular county had not done as good a job of keeping current on that. So they said, if you've got land in CRP, we need to know that at the assessor's office. So sure enough, I went and got the documentation I needed from the FSA office, carried that to the Saline assessor's office, and they reduced the valuation on our ground to about, it's roughly 2/3 of what if I remember correctly, don't hold me to the exact numbers, but it's like 60 or 65% of what the cropping value of those acres were. Well, therefore I pay about 1/3 or 35% less property tax on those acres. Well, then I go, how about my Seward County?
Sure.
So I march in to see my friendly assessor, who is a neighbor. I get along well with her. And I said, hey, how can we do that here? She says, well, I need to know if you've got it in CRP. I said, well, has been for 20 some years already or whatever. So I ran up to the FSA office, got the documentation, brought it back. And sure enough, then those same number of acres that were in the CRP contract were identified and reduced in value in Seward County as well. So just to put it in some numbers that might be closely representative, if you were paying $50 an acre land tax, if you could get that reduced down to $35 an acre, $30 to $35 an acre, why, that's another benefit.
Sure.
If you're maybe getting a little bit less in a payment on your CRP compared to what you could have gotten if you were cropping it.
That's an excellent point.
It's an important one. And again, it's not one that was advertised that I was aware of. And Nate will tell you, I look for those things. I would have missed that, I don't think. But I do try to share that with other people, that if we change what we're doing with your ground, let's see if we can get your land valued a little lower at the assessor's office, so you save some tax cost every year.
Yeah.
And just in case somebody's listening thinking there's no way that it was CRP, it had to be soil type or something like that. It was confirmed that when it was in CRP, that's why your taxes were reduced. It had nothing to do with soils.
Good question, Nate. And I'm sorry I'm interrupting you here, or I'm wanting to get to the answer quickly. I guess it says that right on my assessor's valuation sheets, or on the website. I usually just check stuff on the website. It says CRP and gives the number of acres. Yeah.
Okay. So then how many years were you overpaying?
Well, probably, first of all, I'd have to go back for when they actually started this at the state level, that they would value at a lower level. I don't know when exactly that started, but I'm guessing 7 or 8, 10 years probably.
And let me guess, you didn't get back paid.
No, they don't do anything like that. It's kind of like our lost year of property tax that we're not getting. I'll make my political plug here while we're at it. We tried with LB 81. We just don't have a very cooperative legislature yet on that one.
So, and I think that's a good point when the land taxes, because that's usually the thing that comes up the most often from landowners that I interact with. It's the kind of the way the system's kind of established currently. It doesn't necessarily incentivize conservation adoption. But you obviously found an example where, your own property is like, oh, actually, if I just went in, had that conversation, took the documentation in, there is an opportunity here. But I think sometimes this becomes more of an assumption that, we can't do anything about it. But there are opportunities there. You just need to maybe have some of those conversations. Not saying that's going to fix everything by any means, but you need to have some of those conversations about it. So.
Well, every little bit helps, Andy.
Sure.
And my opinion, I didn't think it was that much work for me to do it.
Yeah.
I went to the FSA office. I asked for the information. They provided it quite easily for me, and I took it down and handed it to the folks in the assessor's office. And sure enough, the next time we did valuation on property in June,
Hmm.
there it was.
Sure.
So,
That's awesome.
Yeah, and if you're reducing land taxes by a third, I mean, as we all know, every little bit helps when you're talking conservation. So, no, that was a great story that I wanted to get out. Anything else that you wanted to say on that?
no, I think we've covered that one well. And again, if people have CRP contracts and they don't see on their valuations, again, you'd see it on your assessed valuation on your land. It would say, besides things like soil type and class 1, class 3, all that type of stuff, it'll say CRP. At least it does in Saline and Seward counties now.
And you should, I mean, if you're right as you're enrolling into CRP, you should go ASAP into that assessor's office so you're not having to overpay for who knows how many years.
Yeah, as soon as that contract starts, you should be getting that lower valuation.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the more we have these conversations, the better, because I think at the end of the day, we want to drive innovation. We want to drive opportunities to take and make these cases of conservation no-brainers for producers. And I have a colleague of mine who's a farmer over in Odo County, and we've talked about this in the past. And he said, it's just thinking about like if there was like, other, tax breaks, other incentives that we could take and, tack on to help, he said, man, sign me up kind of thing. It's like he said, right now, I'm just not really in that boat at the moment, even though I'm interested in conservation. I got to be able to pay the bills. And so, corn, soybeans in his case are what he's operating with. And so he's going to continue with that. He does have some areas that are in conservation, but he would love to grow that even more over time. But it's just the finances are kind of really the big driver there. So.
Well, and as new opportunities are coming along through EQIP and other USDA programs of improving soil health and improving conservation, well, you look at those things and you evaluate them on what's the gain that I get both in perhaps money incentives or just value of the practice in terms of improving my real estate over time. So yeah, we go through those same steps regardless of what the opportunities are that are out there. And the nice thing about this one, it just dawned on me, Nate, is that once you get it done, again, to me, it wasn't very much effort for what my return was.
Sure.
Once you get it done, it isn't like you got to do it every year.
Oh,
it's done.
Sure.
And then that's on you, I guess, if you take your land out of CRP to let them know that you've returned it.
Yeah, sure.
I bet they'll figure out that pretty quick, I'd imagine.
Well, they tell me they also look at aerial maps, and they said, well, we usually look for those things on aerial maps, and we couldn't tell it on yours. I go, I can sure see it on my aerial map.
Yeah.
But no, we've got good county assessors. They're good people.
Yeah. And it's just important to note that just because they're government agencies, I mean, state, federal, they're not communicating. So it is on the landowner to go in and fight for your taxes.
Yeah, it's almost like HIPAA and health information, Well, we've tried at different times back to Seward County Pheasants Forever, trying to get like a lot of information of who has CRP contracts, how we can visit with them. And of course, you can drive around and look at a plat map or have it on Onyx or some other application. But you can't go into your FSA and NRCS offices and say, could you give me a list of all the folks and the locations they have contracts? Nope, can't share any of that information. So, way it goes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
True.
Well, Merlyn, I greatly appreciate you making the trip into Lincoln from Seward, and we covered a lot. And I think it was a lot of good information. And I appreciate you being willing to talk about land taxes because we know that's a big thorn for a lot of landowners out there. So I greatly appreciate it.
I agree with that. I really appreciate you coming in. I think it's been a great conversation. I want to have more conversation. Maybe you can come back and join us again and talk some more because I think it's really important that we have landowners on and have these conversations about like what's working well for you and your operation. And then, how can we share that out and just those success stories? Because I think a lot of times, especially as a researcher, we can share the research, but at the end of the day, in a state like Nebraska, it's 97+% privately owned. Conservation is really with those landowners. And does it make sense for their operation? What works best for them? Obviously, groups like Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever and many others out there that can work and partner with those landowners. And I think just kind of constantly creating kind of that holistic system of communication and engagement and finding ways, we can all work together for the betterment of our systems for future generations is so key. So thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And one other point, I looked on my calendar. The Seward Youth Mentor Hunt is October 11th this year.
There you go.
Get your kids signed up.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Wild Ag is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review so others can find us and tune in.
And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions or topic suggestions to us at wildagpodcast@gmail.com. That's WILDAG podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.